I never thought it would come to this. Never imagined the day I would find myself staring at my wife, wondering if I even knew her. There had always been something unsettling in the air, like a scent too faint to identify, but strong enough to make your head spin. Rebecca had become different. At first, I blamed it on the pressures of life, work, the kids, the constant juggling of 1,000 responsibilities. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the signs seemed to multiply. The first incident I remember was the phone. Rebecca's phone. We used to share everything. No secrets, no locked screens. But then one evening, I noticed the screen lit up as she left the room. A message popped up, a name I didn't recognize. I couldn't bring myself to glance at it. Instead, I told myself it was nothing. It's just work, I thought. But when she came back and slid the phone into her purse without a word, I felt a pang in my chest. Then came the late nights, the excuses that never quite added up. "I'm just staying late to finish something up," she would say, brushing her hair back with a quick, almost forced smile. "I'm exhausted. I'll be home early tomorrow." But early never seemed to come. I tried to believe it. I really did. I made myself think I was just being paranoid. It was a stressful time for both of us, and we were both stretched thin. I tried to reassure myself with these thoughts, but the nagging feeling never went away. And I watched as she grew more distant, her once easy conversations with me now replaced by curt responses or absent-minded nods. The second sign came during a family gathering. It was Emily's birthday, a day when everything was supposed to be light and full of laughter. But Rebecca, who had always been the life of the party, seemed withdrawn. Her gaze kept darting to the door, as if waiting for someone to arrive, and when she smiled, it was forced, like it had to be. As soon as the evening wound down, she excused herself and disappeared for an hour. When she returned, she acted like nothing had happened, but the unease between us was palpable. I found myself starting to question everything. Was she having an affair? The thought felt foreign, unreal. After all, we had built a life together. We had Emily. Our history was rich with memories of love, passion, and companionship. But then why did it feel like the walls were closing in? The tipping point came one evening, just before our anniversary. I was cleaning up after dinner, and I found a receipt in the pocket of her jacket. It was for a hotel. The date matched the night she'd been working late, and the location was not far from home. I felt a knot twist in my stomach. The evidence, if I was honest with myself, was too clear to ignore. But I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation, a mistake, perhaps, or a miscommunication. Maybe she'd been helping a friend who was in town. The possibilities kept running through my head, each one more desperate than the last. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Something was wrong. The day I had been dreading finally arrived, but at that moment, I wasn't sure why I was dreading it. My birthday. A day that, for years, had been a reason to celebrate. The day I was surrounded by the people I loved most. The day Rebecca would wrap me in affection and laughter. But this year, everything fell off. Rebecca seemed particularly cheerful that morning, too cheerful. A smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She brought me coffee in bed, her attempt at a little birthday surprise. She even sang a few lines of Happy Birthday in a way that sounded more forced than usual. But I pretended to enjoy it, smiled back, and thanked her. The birthday breakfast felt like a performance. Still, we had a party planned for the evening. Family and friends were coming over to celebrate, and even though the unease in the air hung over me like a storm cloud, I went through the motions. I greeted guests, accepted the well wishes, and played the role of the happy husband, the happy father. But the smile on my face felt like a mask. I couldn't help but glance over at Rebecca every few seconds. She laughed too loud, spoke too quickly, her body language too eager. Something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. At some point during the evening, I began to feel physically unwell. A tightness in my chest, a fluttering in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I chalked it up to exhaustion, a side effect of trying to pretend everything was fine. I excused myself from the guests, slipping away to the bedroom, where I collapsed onto the bed. I tried to rest, to close my eyes and drift away from the chaos of the celebration. But I couldn't. Just as I was starting to feel the weight of the night begin to lift, I heard a soft knock on the door. I opened my eyes and saw Emily standing in the doorway. Her little face was scrunched up in confusion. "Daddy," she whispered, "Mommy must be in pain." Her words were innocent, but the way she said it caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to sit up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mommy went into the room with Grandpa," she said, her tiny voice so quiet I could barely hear it. "They're making noises. Is she okay?" The room spun around me. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the words Emily had spoken hit me with the force of a freight train. I knew exactly what she meant, even if she didn't fully understand the implications of what she was saying. My mind began to race as I sat up, gripping the bed for support. Rebecca with my father. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The thoughts swirling in my mind were too much to handle. The first thought that hit me was disbelief. How could she? How could they? But then it hit me like a wave. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was betrayal, the deepest kind of betrayal, one that cut through the heart of everything I had ever known. My world, which had always been so solid and certain, began to crumble in an instant. My heart ached, my body shaking with a cold fury I couldn't explain. I wanted to run, to scream, to confront them both right there, but I couldn't move. I felt frozen. I looked at Emily, standing in the doorway, and my heart broke even more. She had no idea what she had just witnessed, what she had just said. She had no idea that her mother, the woman I loved, had shattered everything. And my father, the man who had taught me right from wrong, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling, "go back to the party, okay? I'll be out in a minute." I don't remember how long I sat there after she left. Time felt like it stopped, like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My mind was screaming, my heart pounding, and all I could think about was one thing: revenge. But not yet. Not until I had proof. Not until I could make them both see the depths of the pain they had caused me. I stood there in that room for what felt like an eternity. The weight of Emily's innocent words still hung in the air, a cruel reminder of the shattered trust between Rebecca and me. My birthday of all days. I had been a fool to ignore the signs, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But now everything was clear, and it was unbearable. I had always prided myself on being the kind of man who handled problems head-on. I wasn't one to shy away from confrontation. But this was different. This was the kind of betrayal that left you hollow, like someone had ripped out a piece of your soul. I had always believed that there was no limit to what I could endure, but now I wasn't sure how much more I could take. My thoughts swirled in a storm of anger and confusion. How could she do this to me? How could he? I tried to calm myself, but the sense of betrayal was suffocating. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't ready yet. Not until I had proof. I needed to see it with my own eyes, hear it with my own ears. Only then would I be able to do what I had been planning ever since Emily's words tore through the facade of my life. I left the bedroom, my mind made up. I would get evidence. I would expose them both. The next day, I began to prepare. My hands shook as I set up cameras around the house, hidden but effective. I had no experience with surveillance, but this felt like a matter of survival. My mind raced as I thought of the tools I'd need. A tiny motion-sensitive camera in the hallway. One in the living room. I knew where Rebecca and my father would be. I knew their patterns. I could anticipate their every move. It took me hours to set everything up, the weight of what I was doing pressing down on me with each second. I knew I was preparing to destroy everything. The family I had spent years building, the relationships I had cherished, it would all be gone in an instant. But the anger I felt, the way it burned through my veins, told me there was no turning back. That night, as I went to bed, I felt numb. My thoughts kept racing. Would I see the truth? Would I see them together? Or was I just a fool clutching at the remnants of something that was already lost? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. The following evening, I sat alone in the dark, my heart hammering in my chest as I watched the feed from the cameras I had set up. My hands were clammy as I sipped on the whiskey I had poured myself earlier, trying to steady my nerves. The silence in the house felt like a heavy weight pressing against me, the stillness only amplifying the gnawing uncertainty inside. As the evening wore on, the moment I had been dreading came. I saw Rebecca walking through the hallway, her steps measured and slow, almost as if she knew I was watching. She moved with purpose, her face set in an expression that screamed of guilt, of something being hidden. She didn't even glance toward the camera I had hidden behind the vase. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. A few minutes later, my father entered the frame. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He was moving toward the same room that Rebecca had just entered, the room where they had spent the night together. I wanted to scream, to rush into that room and confront them both. But I stayed frozen, my eyes glued to the screen, unable to look away. This was it, the moment I had feared. The door to the room clicked shut, and for the next few minutes, the only sounds I heard were the soft, muted noises of whispered words and the rustling of sheets. The camera caught their movements as they slowly inched closer, their bodies pressed against one another. I didn't need to see any more. I felt a sickening wave of disgust wash over me, but there was no time to process it. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to break down. Instead, I reached for my phone. I took a deep breath, steadying my trembling hands. The video I had just recorded, everything I had feared, was in my palm now, and it was time to show the world. I didn't hesitate. I sent the video to my phone, prepared to do what was necessary to make them both pay. There was no turning back now. No excuse could save them. The betrayal was too far gone. And when I confronted them with the truth, when I revealed their shame to everyone, I would make sure they understood the full weight of what they had done. The days that followed felt like a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. Work? It seemed like a distant concern. Family? How could I pretend everything was fine when the very foundation of my life had cracked beneath me? I went through the motions, playing the part of a husband, a father, a friend, but inside, I was already a ghost. Rebecca didn't suspect a thing. She carried on, oblivious, as though the storm that had already started to form had not yet reached its peak. She smiled at me, even held my hand once or twice, but I couldn't feel it. Every time she touched me, I felt sick. Her warmth felt like an insult. She had been in my father's arms, and she had looked into my eyes every day since. How could she even stand to look at me? I had the video. I had the proof. I had everything I needed. And yet I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. The anger still simmered beneath my calm exterior, but I wasn't ready to explode. Not until the time was right. Not until I could make them both feel the full weight of their choices. It was becoming unbearable. Every moment spent in the same house, under the same roof, pretending like nothing had happened, was torturous. The constant hum of betrayal echoed in my mind. Every second felt like an eternity. I wanted to shout, to throw the video in her face, to tear down the walls of this false marriage. But I held back. I was building to something bigger. And then it came. It was Rebecca's birthday. The day I had planned to make her wish she had never been born. I had always made her birthdays special, done everything I could to make her feel loved and cherished. But now I would make this one unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. I waited until the party was in full swing. Family and friends were gathered in our home, laughing, talking, celebrating her. They had no idea the drama that was about to unfold. They had no idea the truth that had been hidden for so long. It almost made me laugh, this irony. The betrayal had taken place under their very noses, and they were none the wiser. Rebecca was at the center of it all, the queen of the party. Her smile was radiant, her laugh louder than usual. But I could see the cracks, the nervous glance here and there, the way she kept glancing at the door, the way her fingers trembled when she handed me a glass of wine. She was worried. She knew something was coming, but she had no idea what. I stood at the edge of the room, watching. Every part of me wanted to run to her, to scream in her face, to expose her in front of everyone. But I didn't. I knew that wasn't the way. I was patient. I had waited this long. I could wait a little longer. The time would come, and when it did, it would be devastating. At some point during the night, I stood up. The room had settled into a lull, the music playing softly in the background, the chatter of our guests weaving into a single hum of noise. It was time. I cleared my throat, and the chatter slowly began to quiet. Eyes turned toward me, some curious, some confused. I could feel the eyes of my family, the weight of the attention, but I stood tall. I was no longer the man they thought I was. I wasn't the fool they believed I had been. I had been patient. And now it was my time. Everyone, I began, my voice steady but sharp. I have something I need to show you. Something that changes everything. Rebecca looked at me, her face slowly draining of color. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I cut her off. "I know what you've done," I said, my voice cold. "And it's time the rest of you knew, too." Without another word, I pulled out my phone. The room was silent now, the weight of my words hanging heavily in the air. I tapped the screen, and the video I had taken played out before everyone. The footage was clear. The evidence was undeniable. The room erupted into gasps and murmurs. People's faces twisted in confusion, then shock, and finally disgust. I couldn't see Rebecca's face anymore. She had turned away, her hands trembling at her sides. But I didn't care. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about everyone else seeing what she had done. My father. My own father. In that moment, the betrayal felt even deeper, the wound even sharper. I wanted him to look at me to see the damage he had caused, but he wouldn't. He couldn't. He knew there was no excuse. As the video played, Rebecca's face crumpled, her eyes welling with tears. She tried to speak, to make excuses, but her words were drowned out by the chaos that erupted around us. The shame was there, written across her face, and I felt no satisfaction. Only emptiness. This was not a victory. This was the death of everything we had been. As the last of the video played, I paused it, letting the silence linger just a little longer. "This is the truth," I said, my voice low. "You've both destroyed everything. My trust, our family. And there's no coming back from that." The silence that followed was deafening. It was like the entire room had collectively held its breath and was now struggling to find air. The laughter, the music, the false sense of celebration, it all died in an instant. The faces of our friends and family were a mixture of disbelief, horror, and guilt. No one knew how to respond. Rebecca stood frozen, her hand gripping the edge of the table, as if she needed it to stay upright. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her face, once glowing with the artificial brightness of a birthday celebration, was now pale and streaked with the shame of what had been exposed. She looked at me, her eyes wide with panic, but I couldn't bring myself to offer her any mercy. Not anymore. My father. He hadn't moved since the video played. His face was ashen, his mouth slightly open, like he had just been punched in the gut and couldn't quite process the pain. His eyes shifted to me, but I didn't look away. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done. He was supposed to protect me. He was supposed to be my father. But in that moment, he was nothing but a betrayer. The man who was supposed to be my mentor, my guide, was now a shadow of what he had once been in my eyes. Rebecca tried to speak, but the words came out in a whisper, barely audible over the murmurs of confusion that rippled through the room. "I can explain," she said, her voice cracking as she looked at me. But I was beyond explanations. I was beyond anything she could offer. The damage had been done. There were no words that could undo what had already been exposed. "You don't need to explain," I said flatly. "This is your explanation. This is everything." The guests were beginning to stir, some of them awkwardly shifting in their seats, unsure of what to do. My sister-in-law, who had been one of Rebecca's closest friends, finally stood up. She looked at me with a mix of sympathy and disbelief, but I didn't want her pity. None of them could ever understand. None of them would ever feel the weight of this the way I did. Rebecca stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Please," she begged, her voice shaking. "I never meant for it to happen this way. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you." I didn't want to hear it. I had spent years building a life with her, trusting her in ways I couldn't even describe. And now, that trust was in ruins, burned to the ground by her lies, her deception. The love she spoke of was just a hollow echo of the love I thought we shared. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice low and steady. "And you threw it away. For what? For a night? For a lie? For him?" The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in on me. I was hyper-aware of every person in that room, every eye on me, every whispered comment that was rising in volume. My heart ached for Emily, who was still at her friend's house, unaware of the hell that was unfolding in her home. She didn't deserve this. I turned to face my father. His eyes were still locked on me, but now there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, perhaps, or shame, or maybe even fear. But it didn't matter. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "How could you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this to me?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. What could he say? There was no justification for what he had done, no excuse that could make it right. He stood there, broken and silent, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the truth had crushed him. Rebecca, desperate for something, anything to save face, tried again. Ryan, please. You have to understand. It was a mistake. We were both. But I cut her off. No, this isn't a mistake. A mistake is spilling coffee on the carpet. This was a choice you made over and over again. And now we're here. And there's no going back. The truth hit like a tidal wave. The anger, the betrayal, it all surged within me. I felt a fire burning in my chest. But it wasn't just rage. It was a desire for justice. A need to make them see what they had done, what they had stolen from me. The room was still buzzing, the air thick with tension. Some guests had already started to leave, unable to stomach what had unfolded. Others remained, unsure of what to say or do. But I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for them. I wasn't doing this for their approval. I was doing this for me. And for Emily. The weight of the decision I had made hit me all at once. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was about taking back control of my life. I had been a prisoner in this marriage, shackled by trust, and now I was free. Free to rebuild. Free to be someone else, someone stronger, someone who would never let betrayal consume him again. But even in the midst of that, I knew there was more to come. There would be fallout. There would be consequences. But that didn't scare me. Not anymore. I turned to leave the room, to walk away from the chaos I had unleashed. But as I reached the door, I paused. Rebecca, I said quietly, without turning around, you'll never see Emily again. Not until I say so. You've lost that privilege. And with that, I walked out of the room. The house was eerily quiet in the days that followed. The laughter and music that had filled the rooms only days before now felt like distant memories. The weight of the truth hung heavily in the air, settling in the corners of every room. I had finally done what I needed to do, but the aftermath was not what I expected. It wasn't a feeling of triumph or victory, but a crushing sense of loss. The life I thought I had, the family I had spent years building, was gone. Rebecca didn't call. She didn't come over either. I had expected some form of pleading, some desperate attempt to mend things. But there was nothing. She had disappeared, retreating into the shadows of her own shame. I didn't know where she went or who she turned to. And honestly, I didn't care. The woman I had known, the woman I had loved, was a ghost now, someone unrecognizable. The words she had spoken to me, her apologies and pleas, meant nothing anymore. She had made her choice. As for my father, the silence between us was suffocating. He hadn't tried to contact me either. I didn't want to know what was going through his mind, but it was clear that his guilt had taken root deep inside him. I could feel it, even from a distance. There was no reconciliation here, not now, not ever. He had shattered everything between us, and now he was left to live with the consequences. I knew Emily would be the hardest part. She was still oblivious, still living in a world that hadn't been tainted by the truths I had uncovered. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the ugliness that had invaded our lives, but I knew that the time was coming when I would have to tell her. I couldn't hide the truth from her forever, no matter how much it tore me apart. It was the following Saturday when Rebecca showed up. She arrived unannounced, standing on the doorstep with a suitcase at her side. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, but I didn't let myself feel anything for her. Not anymore. The moment I had dreaded, the moment I had feared for so long, had arrived. She asked if she could see Emily, her voice trembling with a mix of desperation and guilt. I couldn't let her see our daughter like this. Not yet. You've lost that right, I told her, my voice cold and unwavering. You don't get to walk back into Emily's life like nothing happened. You've made your choices, Rebecca. You've made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. She pleaded, of course. She cried, apologized again, but her words were just noise. I couldn't listen anymore. She had lost the privilege of being part of Emily's world, and I wasn't about to let her worm her way back in. Not after everything she had done. I'll fight for custody, she said, her voice shaky. I'll do whatever it takes. I wasn't surprised. I had expected as much, but I wasn't afraid. I would fight for Emily with everything I had, and I would win. Rebecca's betrayal had been too deep, too calculated, for her to ever have the right to be a mother to Emily again. Do what you need to do, I replied coldly. But don't expect me to let you back into her life. Not now. Not ever. With that, I turned and closed the door, leaving her standing on the porch. I could hear her sobbing outside, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The decision had been made. It was time to move forward for both Emily's sake and mine. The weeks that followed were filled with tension. Rebecca filed for joint custody, just as I had expected. The court papers arrived in the mail, each one a reminder of the battle I was about to fight. But I wasn't afraid. I was ready. I knew that what I was fighting for was more than just custody. It was the future of my daughter, the safety of her heart and mind. I wasn't going to let Rebecca's betrayal define her. I met with my lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Claire, who immediately started preparing for the case. The evidence I had gathered, the video, the text, the footage from the cameras, was solid. There was no way Rebecca could argue against it. But Claire reminded me that the battle wouldn't be easy. Divorce and custody cases were never simple, especially when emotions ran high. We'll have to prepare for the worst, Claire said. Rebecca will likely try to paint you as the villain, trying to make her infidelity seem like a mistake. But we have the facts, Ryan. And in the end, the court will see the truth. I nodded, but inside I felt sick. I couldn't understand how Rebecca could even attempt to justify what she had done. The damage was done, and there was no going back. Still, the thought of Emily being dragged through this nightmare filled me with dread. But there was no other choice. This was the only way to protect her. The court dates came and went. Rebecca's defense was weak, filled with excuses and half-hearted apologies. She claimed she had made a mistake, that she was going through a rough patch in our marriage, and that was a one-time thing. But I knew the truth, and the court saw through her lies. When it was my turn to testify, I focused on Emily. I talked about her love for both her mother and me, but I made it clear that what Rebecca had done had destroyed the foundation of trust in our family. I talked about how I had tried to protect Emily from the pain of the affair, but how Rebecca's actions had already affected her. And I promised the court that I would do everything in my power to ensure that Emily grew up in a stable, loving environment. Rebecca's lawyer tried to argue, but it was no use. The court sided with me, granting me primary custody of Emily. Rebecca would have supervised visitation, and her relationship with our daughter would be under strict conditions. It was over. The battle was won. The legal battle had been a grueling experience, but it was finally behind me. I had won, and now it was time to rebuild. Emily was my priority. I couldn't afford to let the past destroy the future. So we started fresh. We made new routines, new traditions, ones that were free from the shadows of the past. I took Emily on trips, just the two of us. We spent weekends at the park, and I made sure she knew that no matter what had happened between Rebecca and me, I would always be there for her. I promised her that I would never leave her, no matter what. I never heard from Rebecca again after the custody ruling. I didn't care. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. I wasn't going to let her in. Not anymore. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. The weight had been lifted, and while the scars from the betrayal would always be there, I knew I could heal. I had Emily, and together we would build a future.